several years ago wrote a good book called The Sleepwalkers. Essentially, it's a description of how the Europeans slept-walked to war in 1914. And I picked it up in my bookshelf the other night in New York and saw how much I had underlined it page by page. My wife hates the way I read books. I destroy books when I read them. I use a pen and I mark it all the way through. It's just a mess by the end. But this one was particularly heavily scored. I also remembered what Graham told me when I was here with him at the Kennedy School at Belfast. He said, quote, "You can never study World War I too much," unquote. That's my paraphrase of the Allison doctrine. And there's a reason for that. If you look carefully at all the balance of power considerations of the First World War, when you get to the critical events of July of 1914, the escalation which unfolded was in part because there was a comprehensive failure of diplomacy. And Chris Clark's book documents that capital by capital as he goes from Vienna to London to Paris to Petersburg and everywhere else. So this haunts me. As I write in the first bit of the book, Graham, one of my earliest childhood memories is marching in our annual Memorial Day type parade in Australia. We call it Anzac Day. Any Australians here? It's the anniversary of the... Hi guys. It's the anniversary of the Gallipoli landings in 1915. And I'm just old enough to remember marching with these guys who were World War I veterans. I was about 5 years old and they would have been 75 at the time. I remember my father, who was a World War II veteran, saying to me, as we walked in, this is a parade in a tiny country town, population of a few hundred people, dawn service, okay, religious matter. And my father leant over to me and said, "That's Ted, he's still suffering from the shell shock." And this was in late 60s. And we were talking about the events on the Somme back in 1516. So I ain't a peacenik, never have been. I'm a realist in terms of both international relations theory and practice. But one is always haunted by these things. And any of us who read history and meet people and remember people who have been active in it are then, I think, ethically compelled to do their best to make it less probable that there be a repeat in the future. Barrel along to the present, and what's the book about? It's a very realist text. I do not believe the China-US relationship will be solved by a kumbaya moment in the corner over there after a bit of Mao Tai next Tuesday evening. It's just not like that. These are deeply sophisticated political cultures who have made deeply sophisticated calculations about each other, partly and significantly anchored in deep considerations of the evolving balance of power between them. 综合国力. And the Chinese calculation as to what constitutes its own aggregate power. So that's the realistic premise upon which this book is constructed. The second premise is this: whether we use whatever language Washington or Beijing may use, the reality is there is an unfolding strategic competition between them for who will become the dominant power militarily, economically and technologically, not just in Asia, but eventually globally. And they are the stakes that are being played for. Whether we choose to recognize that or not, or whether political spokesmen in Beijing or Washington would be so bold and brassy as to say that explicitly, which they won't be. But if you look beneath the surface and observe the behaviors, that's actually what is happening. So, if you take that premise and accept that as the basis of my argument, then there are simply two alternatives. One is, do you have unmanaged strategic competition? That is, no rules of the road, no guardrails, no nothing. Just fasten your seatbelt if there is one and hope that the bus doesn't career off the side of the cliff. And the reflections going back to, again, July of 1914 is that it takes often just a spark. The assassination of an obscure archduke which nobody had ever heard of, let alone, in the far-flung provinces of Australia, before we sent off, 500,000 troops to war, 20% of whom came back either dead or injured. That it takes a small thing, often, to then escalate and to turn into something much larger. So, the question I ask is unmanaged strategic competition, because that's where we are right now. Or can the two governments and their senior representatives between them agree on de minima rules of the road, basic guardrails which reduce, not eliminate, the prospects of crisis, escalation, conflict and war for the decade ahead. That's why I've written it. And the last point is this: so what's the notion of managed strategic competition? It's got three unremarkable components, and probably four. The first is, and the hardest bit is this, but it's doable. If you sat in a cold room with the National Security Advisor of the United States and his nearest Chinese equivalent, or her nearest Chinese equivalent, whether it's Yang Jiechi or either of the vice chairs of the Central Military Commission, or both, or all three on the Chinese side, then what would they agree to be the absolute irreducible strategic red lines and the 4 or 5 big things that matter? Taiwan, obviously. South China Sea to some extent. Donghai, the East China Sea, and Senkaku Diaodao, certainly. Cyber and space. And I'll leave Shankar talk about the Sino-Indian border, but maybe not in terms of the US-China relationship. And to simply list the topics is one thing. That barely opens the door. It's the granularity of the sub-issues which each presents. For example, taking Taiwan. Where the red lines lie on the question of future trade embargoes against Taiwan, let alone a maritime blockade. What about a cyber attack against Taiwanese civil infrastructure? What about China one day deciding to demonstrate American impotence by salami slicing, taking the offshore islands? Take Jinmen, take Mazu, which are both militarily incapable of being defended because they're 10 kilometres off the coast or less. So within the granularity of each of those, what actually are the mutual understandings about lines which cannot be crossed, even if formally you can't agree with the other side on it? The second element of the architecture is simply this. If you, through the high-level diplomacy involving the individuals I've just represented, are capable of agreeing on that, then what are the other domains of non-lethal strategic competition which will then unfold? And being a realist, my view is that would entail still significant and continued expansion qualitatively and quantitatively of each side's military, growing foreign policy footprints around the world in a competitive space, hard-nosed economic competition, certainly in trade, investment, capital markets, currency markets, and also this enormous debate which is ideational and ideological and ideas for the future construction of the international system. Do you want a set of authoritarian values through a Sino-centric system, which Xi Jinping in the internal ideological literature of China does speak about? And you look at the way in which China challenges existing norms of the system in, say, the Human Rights Council in Geneva. It's very explicit. I'm just being descriptive, I'm not being pejorative. Or the American view of universal freedoms, anchored in Universal Declaration of 48, but also the construction of the international economic system as well. And the final piece in the jigsaw, and I'll shut up, is also to agree through that mechanism on the defined areas of continued strategic collaboration, where, again, from a realist prism, it's in the defined national interests of each side to so collaborate. Now, I think the consensus so far is relatively clear, at least with Democrats in Washington and the Communist Party of China, that climate change now constitutes that. There'll be ebbs and flows about the intensity of the action, but the scientific establishment, I think, has reached consensus, and a large slice of the political and policy establishment. And if you don't act, then you climatically, environmentally, you blow each other's brains out as well over time. Look at China's grain harvest this year. Badly impaired because of extreme weather events, which are frankly the product of what we see globally. Same in my country. We've been flooded to bits in recent time. Next year we'll be droughted to bits. And each of these is becoming more intense. But also the next pandemic. Can we do better than last time, where we just bifurcated and collaborate on the vaccine and its distribution? Global financial stability. So they're the three sets of principles, and that's why I wrote the book. Over to you, Graham.
Good. Thank you for a very concise summary, and